Living in a boring place as a photographer used to feel like jail. And I thought the only time I could take any interesting photos was when I traveled to interesting places. But when I think about it, photography is not about capturing interesting places. It's about capturing places and moments that we've seen and making them look interesting. And over the last 5 years, as a street photographer and travel photographer, I've learned a couple of techniques that help me take great photos even in boring places. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing my approach and 4 tips to make anything look interesting, even a pile of wet wipes. And I promise this is going to make sense. But let's start with tip number 1, make the light your subject. This one may sound confusing, but hear me out. The thing is, we usually think of light as a tool to highlight our subject and to show the viewer where to look at in our composition. And because we're focused so much on our subject, we, or at least I, always have this feeling of my subject having to be the most interesting thing in the world, which is kind of difficult if you're in a boring place, because usually there's not too many interesting things. But what if we turn it around and instead of taking a photo of something to show the thing, we just take a photo of something to show the light instead? And the good thing about this approach is that good light can be found anywhere in the world, even if you live in the most boring place in the world. But the key here is to find things that give some kind of shape to the light. And this could be anything like buildings, leaves, archways, or even the entrances to a train station. So by making the light the subject, you can kind of relieve yourself of the pressure of having to have something interesting or having an interesting subject to photograph, and instead find mundane things that you can find anywhere and using the light to make it look interesting. Okay, another thing you can do is give context, for example, by using visual cues like frames or leading lines, because these help you create a kind of visual interest and also make your photo feel more alive. And if you incorporate these correctly, you're not only taking a photo of your subject, but also about the environment. And suddenly your photo is not just about the thing you're photographing, but also about the thing within the environment, which helps you kind of tell more of a story. And I actually have 2 whole videos about these visual cues and how you can use them to elevate your visual storytelling. And I'll link them in the description so you can watch them right after this video. And I promise after watching these 2, this will make a whole lot more sense. Okay, another thing you can do to make boring places look more interesting is to photograph common things that look unusual. And there's 3 things that I can think of that'll help you do this. And one way to do this is to contrast the place you're photographing with something within the place that doesn't belong there. This could be as simple as having a field with some kind of metal fence in it that just looks like it doesn't really belong there, or a subway station where wires are hanging from the roof. And the list goes on and on. But the point here is to shoot things that make you go, wait, why is this here? Or even think, I know places like these, but this one just looks kind of off. Maybe because it's broken, or maybe because it just looks different than what you would expect. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed, because I'm a really tiny channel and this will help me make more videos like these in the future. And also it gives me a kind of feedback to know whether anything I'm sharing here is actually helpful. Okay, another way you can make places that are common look unusual is to photograph them during an unusual time of day. Let's take these cows on a meadow as an example, because honestly, watching cows eat grass is probably as mundane as it gets. But if you think about it, when was the last time you've seen cows on a meadow during sunrise? At least for me, this is a kind of unusual sight. And this whole photo is not just about the cows, It's about the whole scene, and it's about this whole morning that is an unusual sight. Because if you're anything like me, during sunrise, you're either busy sleeping or on your way to work. And during these times, we tend to not notice these very mundane moments because we are distracted by the sunrise or we're just busy with our own thoughts. And by paying attention during these times, you can get away with some interesting photos. So the idea here is that this photo becomes interesting because we're not used to seeing cows in the context of a sunrise. But you don't only have to shoot during sunrise, golden hour, or sunset, which is where my next tip comes in. And that is to notice. And what I mean by this is pay attention to your surrounding. And I know this sounds like the most generic of advice, like just pay attention and capture the right moment, but let me explain. Sometimes it's just about how the light falls onto your subject. And this is where the pile of wet wipes comes in, because this photo is obviously not about these wet wipes, but just about how the light falls. And for me, this itself makes this scene kind of more interesting because it, for one, because of the color of the light, it looks a little bit nostalgic. And two, this photo is like a fleeting moment, as if you would go into a shop, see this light on this pile, you'd see it, and you, as a photographer, you'd probably think, hey, this looks kind of interesting. But you would probably just rush by it because you're on your way home, you're just going to shop some groceries. And the point here is to capture these fleeting moments, not to capture the wet wipes, just to capture the moment the light fell just perfectly on this pile. And sometimes it can also just be about showing things or places that people know from seeing, but they have very little knowledge beyond this thing other than seeing it, like construction sites, for example. Because honestly, I've seen a million construction sites where I live, and they're not the most interesting, and usually they are nuisance. But if you think about it, if a kid came to you and asked you what the people were doing there, would you have another answer other than they're repairing the street? Because I wouldn't. And it makes me wonder, what are these people actually doing? I know they are working there, of course, but if you look at this ladder, I have no image in my head that lets me know how it looks if I go down this ladder. I have no idea what I would do if I was a worker there and if I stepped down the ladder and worked down there. And that is kind of the point of it. It may not be the most interesting thing in the world, but if a photo makes you kind of think about these mundane questions, I think that's a good photo. And that's what photos should do. So the takeaway here is to be curious about things that you think are boring. Notice things that look common, but somewhat unusual, and take photos that ask questions instead of answering them. And this may sound like a paradox, but I feel like these boring photos and these mundane photos are often much more interesting than these epic landscapes or epic locations that we see on social media. And don't get me wrong, I also like traveling to photograph epic landmarks and I like to share them online because it feels great. But I feel like we shouldn't only be posting these kind of highlight reels of our photography journey. Because for me, photography is about expressing myself. And if I'm just sharing highlight reels and the same epic landmarks and landscapes that anybody else is sharing, I'm not actually expressing myself. I'm just repeating what anyone else is saying. And also, photography is about capturing moments that we tend to forget very quickly. And I feel like this is even more the case for street photography. And we seem to forget these moments because all we see online are epic photos that are just perfect. And you feel like you can only take these photos when you're traveling to some amazing location. And that kind of makes us feel like that these everyday scenes that we see literally every day are just not worth it sharing. But funnily enough, these mundane moments for me have become such a rare sight because not many people share them online that they become somewhat special, which is kind of ironic because they do happen every day and you can find them even in the most boring situation. So, what I'm trying to say is that boring places and boring locations kind of help us to sharpen our eye to find actually interesting things within these boring locations. And also, they're a way to express ourselves more authentically rather than just sharing these highlight photos of epic locations. Okay, lastly, we have shooting in photo sets. And this is important because it's impossible to capture a place in one single photo. And this goes for boring places as well as interesting travel destinations. And the good thing about photo sets is that they allow you to focus on different aspects in each individual photo. So what a good set needs is an establishing shot, ambience shots, and detail shots. So let's go through these one by one. So, establishing shots set the scene. They tell your viewer what kind of place the set is about, and they're usually shot on wider lenses like 35 millimeters or below. And these shots give your viewer a kind of orientation to really understand at what kind of place the set takes place. And they don't have to be the first thing you show in your set, but they have to be in your set to give your viewer context about the whole place. Okay, next up are ambience shots. These are about what's happening at the place or just about things that are unique to the place. They show your viewer elements that make the place feel kind of special, even if it's the most mundane things. And I call them medium shots because I usually take them somewhere between 35 and 50 millimeters, but you can of course take these kind of shots on a focal length outside of this range. Okay, lastly, we have detail shots. With these shots, I often single out certain elements and get really close to show a kind of perspective that wide shots can't give you. And these detail shots are very important to really show what is going on in the place and to focus on something that is very unique or just very interesting about this whole scene. And these detail shots help you focus on one single thing that you thought was interesting, which is very important because this is your story, or the way you are telling a story about the place. So this is unique to you. And they are also helpful to highlight a certain feeling that a place gave you, like plants growing over signs that people have placed there maybe years ago. And what's important here is to remember that these detail shots don't have to be amazing or perfect. They can be imperfect as long as they are showing the detail, because these detail shots are only viewed as a part of this set. So this is very important here. Okay, so this is it for photographing boring places. If you enjoyed this video and got anything helpful out of it, I would appreciate it if you liked and subscribed the video. If you want to know more about anything that I said in this video, if you have any questions, ideas, or feedback, just leave me a comment and I'll get back to you. Other than that, I hope this video helps you create with more intention, and I'll see you next Wednesday.